A lot of people consider Episode 5 to be the greatest Star Wars movie of all time, and with good reason. When hit the big screen back in 1977 and changed the world forever, there was one common criticism found among everyone, including the cast: the writing.
The dialogue was a little bit difficult. I remember there was one line that I just begged him to take out. Boy, I'll never forget it as long as I live. I sometimes dream about this line. But we can't turn back.
Here is their greatest
defense. I doubt if the actual
security there is much greater than on Apple.
Fire Solace, and what there
This is most likely directed towards a
large-scale assault. And I thought, who talks like this, George?
I said to George, you can type this stuff, but you can't say it.
And I started reading. I didn't think the dialogue was very good.
So for Episode 5, George Lucas enlisted the help of Irvin Kershner to direct, with Lee Brackett and Lawrence Kasdan to help write. He basically just chucked all of his ideas at them and said, go wild. Now, George Lucas was still heavily involved in the production of this movie. He still occasionally gave notes and small tweaks to the story, but he surrounded himself with better storytellers than he was to elevate this movie, to make it be the best movie back then ever put to film. And still to this day, one of the best movies ever made. You can't deny that.
I found a review from 1980 about The Empire Strikes Back, and it says, after seeing The Empire Strikes Back, I came away with a feeling that finally, after all these years, science fiction has been brought to the screen in all its glory. The Empire Strikes Back is so rich, so full of mystery and excitement, and, most of all, wonder. Each scene with Darth Vader and the Imperial fleet brought a feeling of awesome galaxy-spanning power, only previously expressed in Asimov's great novels. I don't know who Asimov is. Experiencing the fantastic Yoda on the screen felt like the reading of the best of Tolkien. To me, The Empire Strikes Back represents the first true science fiction film with all of its parts complete. The characters, the theme, the special effects, and the magic. It has the right to be called the first science fiction epic. Asimov is the writer of I, Robot, the movie with Will Smith, but the book version.
Can a robot write a symphony? Can a robot turn a canvas into a beautiful masterpiece?
Can you?
No. 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 No.
George Lucas then went solo when he decided to make the prequel movies, and The Phantom Menace was actually his first directorial debut since the original Star Wars. And whilst those prequel movies are beloved now, they were severely hated when they first came out. That's going to be a recurring theme in this video.
Attack of the Clones? That's Attack.
I just heard that.
What is
I just heard the new Star Wars film's called Attack of the Clones.
No.
There is. Is that better than Phantom Menace? I don't know.
The prequels are now loved through all of their flaws. I mean, for me especially, it's Episode 2. I find that movie unbelievably boring now, but whenever I think of the movie, I get this warm, fuzzy feeling. I mean, hey, that's nostalgia for you. But after the Star Wars prequel trilogy was finished, George Lucas then tried to make a live-action Star Wars TV show called Star Wars Underworld. Not that one, you sneaky thing.
I find it so funny that this is the only quote on IMDb, and it comes from this character.
And there's even test footage that you can find of this TV show. It's just up on YouTube. But this show ended up being too expensive to make per episode. I think it was about like $1 million an episode, which is just way too much to spend back then. I mean, now, you know, they'll blow $200 million on an 8-episode TV show. After realizing that making a live-action Star Wars TV show was too expensive at that point, George Lucas then turned to animation, and that's when he started work on The Clone Wars. Then, after a few certainly questionable decisions by George Lucas, Star Wars The Clone Wars aired theatrically with a movie, which was just 4 episodes put together and just shoved into the cinemas, and it aired on Cartoon Network with a new episode coming out every single week. Now, this show was absolutely and pretty much universally hated and despised when it first came out for the animation style, for the childish writing, for other reasons. Let me get my notepad, I'll be right back. I've got my notes here, and it is an article from August 14th of 2008 titled "The Force Has Left the Building." This is the first feature-length animated Star Wars movie, but instead of pushing the state of the art, it's retro. You'd think the great animated films of recent years had never been made. The characters have hair that looks like it's moulded from Play-Doh, bodies that seem arthritic, and moving lips on half-frozen faces. All signs that shortcuts were taken in the animation work. The dialogue in the original Star Wars movies had a certain grace, but here the characters speak to one another in simplistic declamation, and Yoda gets particularly tiresome with his once charming speech pattern. To quote the famous line by Walcott Gibbs, "Backward ran sentences until reeled the mind." I don't know what that means. The battle scenes are interminable, especially once we realise that although the air is filled with bullets, shells and explosive rockets, no one we like is going to be killed. The two armies attack each other for some reason, only on a wide street in a towering city. First one army advances, then the other. Why not a more fluid battle? Okay. Ahsoka Tano, by the way, is annoying. She bats her grapefruit-sized eyes at Anakin and offers suggestions that invariably prove her right and her teacher wrong. At least when we first meet Yoda, he was offering useful advice. What advice? The guy was banging R2-D2 with a stick. Let me grab my beater. The question is, who is Jabba's wife? The puzzle is, how do hearts copulate? Like, why are you asking this question, bro? It's a wonder why the slugs are slugging each other. Well, it looks here that Roger Ebert, the guy that wrote this review, is dead. So now I feel bad for making fun of his article on Star Wars. Cool. 1.5 stars though. I mean, it's not that bad. A couple things to note here is that A, this show was not made for adults, and George Lucas will even say this. I mean, he's always said that this is a kids franchise.
So I did 1, 2, and 3. 1, which got completely trashed. When 1 came out, it was the beginning of the internet. The critics and the fans who had been 10 years old when they saw the first one, it's a children's film. I don't want to see a children's film. You know, it's terrible. That Jar Jar is terrible. I said, you know, everybody said the same thing about about 3PO. That guy's so irritating. Why don't you get rid of him? There was a huge thing about getting rid of 3PO. And then when I did the third one, the Ewoks, they said, well, those are little teddy bears, those are little kids. This is a kids movie. We don't want to see a kids movie. We want to see an adult film. I said, it's a kids movie. It's always been a kids movie. It is a kids movie.
B, as the watchers of the show got older, so did the show. It aged with its viewers, and it aged beautifully. I mean, the show grew more darker, more violent, and it tackled quite serious and very mature themes for a show that was running on Cartoon Network. Gone were the days of Anakin committing war crimes and playing it off as a joke and everyone laughs and ha, you killed 47 innocent people, but that's okay. You saved the day. Just kidding. I lied. Season 7 Anakin does the exact same thing. But gone were the days of cringy interactions and terrible humour and, I mean, if you really want to say it, poor animation. The show was for men! Rah! Then, in 2012, George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney for $4 billion, and Kathleen Kennedy was appointed as his head and successor to George for Lucasfilm. She would have say over all the creative ideas and projects that get made. George thought that she was best for this job out of a lot of candidates. But since about 2015, since the release of episode 7, the non-stop hatred that she has been given is incredible. I mean, it's been 10 years. And me what the fuck is that? It's so funny. Personally, I don't think I'd be able to keep working at that company if I was getting hated on by everyone on the internet for 10 years straight. With Kathleen Kennedy, there seems to be this common misconception that she is the root problem of every Star Wars fan's problems. The movies, the shows, their relationship with their kids, their marriages. I swear to you, one time I saw this Kathleen Kennedy hater in a comment section with a bunch of other haters saying that she gave his dad cancer and made him die. The truth is that whilst a lot of people may hate her, they're all for the wrong reasons. Everyone has this idea that she isn't qualified for her job, and everyone hates Disney Star Wars, but a lot of them don't even know what that means. They seem to forget that Disney Star Wars consists of... We are here today for the trial of one Kathleen Kennedy. let's see what we have here. One Clone Wars Season 7, greenlit by one Kathleen Kennedy. One The Mandalorian, greenlit by one Kathleen Kennedy. Rogue One, and look at that, greenlit by Kathleen Kennedy. Andor, once again greenlit by Kathleen Kennedy. Wow, you've done a lot of great work. Solo, very underrated Star Wars story, by the way. Greenlit by, once more, yours truly, Kathleen Kennedy. Rebels Season 5, Ahsoka, greenlit by Kathleen Kennedy. We hereby declare not guilty. Those right there are a lot of projects that are pretty much unanimously loved by every single Star Wars fan. And even though she oversaw the productions of all of them, greenlit all of them, and was involved creatively to some extent, she is always hated and scrutinized no matter what. Hold up, I need to sneeze. Yes, she has had some blunders, but so does every executive and every business. I believe that's part of doing business. Maybe not when the so-called business is actually a beloved franchise that's been going for well over 40 plus years, but to Disney it's just another business. The same thing with Marvel. And toy sales are heavily focused and prioritized over brand integrity. But again, according to George Lucas, it's a kid's franchise. I mean, look at what's his name? David Zaslav, that absolute ghoul over there. I mean, he's had plenty of blunders, and yet no one scrutinises him nearly enough, even though he's like an actual criminal. Allegedly. Now, with the recent announcement of Star Wars Episodes 10, 11, and 12, the hate is ramping up again. She very clearly is qualified for her job because she was hired by George himself and trained by him to replace him. When people say they hate Disney Star Wars, they mean just the bad stuff like Episode 9, but they tend to forget all of the great content we have had in the last 10 years. Now let's compare that in contrast to Dave Filoni.
So he's fighting for Anakin, and that's why it's the duel of fates. It's the fate of this child. And depending on how this fight goes, Anakin is his life's gonna be dramatically different. So Qui-Gon loses, of course.
David Filoni. The Star Wars community holds Dave Filoni up like a god. And whilst he is very talented and as much of a fan as I am myself and very good at his job, he shouldn't be held up like a god. And here's why. Before working on the Clone Wars, Filoni was working on Avatar: The Last Airbender, which, you know, as a show goes, that is pretty fucking good. And he came on as a supervising director. In truth, he never actually wrote that many Clone Wars episodes. He mostly just oversaw the vocal performances and storyboarding as a whole. Then once Clone Wars was shut down and Rebels was started up, he again was the supervising director. He oversaw like artwork and general concept and worked with mostly the voice cast, but the writing was done separately. But it was the same story, it came out, and everyone hated it. Not me though. I'm sure it was childish, the animation was terrible, the voice cast wasn't great and whatnot. Like, man, you just cannot please Star Wars fans. Then the show got slightly darker, not as dark as the Clone Wars, but people then started to like it more. And I personally think that Star Wars Rebels at its best is better than the Clone Wars at its best. But Star Wars Rebels at its worst is worse than Clone Wars at its worst. But please don't kill me. It's just an opinion. After Rebels ended, Jon Favreau then came on and began work on his Star Wars project. Set in, at the time, a relatively unexplored area, but now it's where every single Star Wars project is set, about 5 years post Return of the Jedi, following a lone gunslinger, and who else did he get to help him but the legendary Dave Filoni. I love The Mandalorian Season 1 and Season 2. The first season of The Mandalorian is absolutely incredible. I mean, just listen to this music, man. And people tend to forget that when hating on Disney Star Wars, because that was really, I mean, the first Disney Plus original series for Star Wars. Self-contained, has a great story, and the character development in Season 1 is absolutely stellar, even if, you know, in later seasons it got kind of backtracked. Also, Cara Dune is a baddie. I mean, Cara Dune, oof. But after this show did great, and everyone shared around that video from the gallery on the roundtable of Dave Filoni talking about what Duel of the Fates means. After the success of Season 1, Filoni and Favreau were given more freedom, and what's the first thing that Filoni does? Takes the standalone series and character and brings all of his created characters into that show, meaning that instead of having one self-contained show, you now need to watch hours and hours of content just to understand who characters are. No matter how cool these things are as a Star Wars fan myself, from a storytelling perspective, it is just annoying, and for a casual fan it makes it so much harder. I remember back when Season 2 was airing and my girlfriend wanted to watch it, and I said no, we can't watch that, we have to watch all of the Clone Wars first, and I made her sit through all of the Clone Wars. Back then I was the kind of guy to say you're not a true Star Wars fan if you haven't watched this and this and this and this and every single animated show and experienced everything there is to offer, and you're not a Star Wars fan otherwise. But since then, I'm a changed man. I mean, Star Wars can be whatever you want it to be. Star Wars is however deep you want it to go. The Mandalorian Season 2 isn't bad at all, but for the average viewer, it deters them from watching because they have to watch so much extra content. Because otherwise, Star Wars fans call them stupid for not knowing who Ben Quadraneros is. Or they have to watch 14 seasons of animated TV shows just to catch up compared to Season 1 of The Mandalorian, which was its own thing. Someone who has never seen Star Wars before could pick up The Mandalorian and just jump in. Appealing to fans is great, but if you want to make profits, you have to appeal to such a wider audience, or the biggest amount possible, not to ostracize the average person.
And if they don't appeal to the biggest markets possible, then you're not going to get to watch more Star Wars content because they won't want to fund it because the viewership's not there. Which is the same thing that would have happened no matter the studio, even if it was under George Lucas's control. If the demand isn't there, they're simply just not going to make it.
For example, I have never played League of Legends, and I never will, praying to God, but I have watched Arcane. Now, imagine if the writers of Arcane made it so that in Season 2, in order for me to understand just anything, I had to play 100 hours of the game and read 3 comic series just to know who the characters are. It would deter me from watching it because I'm being basically gate-kept out of it. The issue that Dave Filoni has with his writing is that he can't just seem to make new characters without bringing back nearly all of his own characters in the process, over and over. In fact, the only character that Dave Filoni has created that has stayed dead is Kanan, with his incredibly emotional death, because it's the only one that stays dead. Every other character has gone missing, meaning that they could come back in another show, or they have died and come back to life again, but Kanan is the only one that stayed dead, even though they were going to bring him back. But I'm glad they didn't. For example, Ahsoka left the Jedi Order, came back again, survived Order 66, left again, died on Malachor, came back again, died in the Ahsoka series, and came back again.
I choose to live.
That's a lot for one character. Captain Rex was invented for Clone Wars, survived Order 66, went missing, showed up in Rebels, became a key player in Rebels, showed up in the Bad Batch. As the biggest Star Wars fan I know and have ever met, I'm not mad that these characters haven't been killed off because I love them so much, but they don't need to keep coming back up because, especially for the more casual fan, it's overwhelming, and for the deeper fan, it just sort of nullifies all the tension because you know that Dave Filoni is going to bring back these characters. See, the ending of Season 4 of Star Wars Rebels is incredible, especially when Kanan dies, and it's horrible, and they spend an entire episode dedicated to just mourning, and then Ezra and Thrawn go missing. And you think, oh, that's the end, but you know they're still out there, and it was set up, but nothing was ever really explained, and it's left to the imagination. Or how about how Ahsoka has died like 3 times in canon, and she keeps coming back, or died rather. My point is that within the Star Wars community, Filoni is held up as a god, when in reality, he still needs time to perfect his writing and stop the whole Filoniverse, because it's hindering the quality of Star Wars projects. And as I said, people have a serious misconception of his previous job roles. He never wrote that many Clone Wars episodes at all, and he isn't taking Kathleen Kennedy's job. One thing people forget is that The Acolyte, a show that I like and think the fight scenes are very cool. And I think Kaime is very hot as a straight man. Filoni actually mentored Leslie Headland on how to write the story of The Acolyte. So if you have any issues with the story, take it up with both of them, not just Leslie Headland. And don't just be disgusting or involving to members of the cast and the crew just because they ruined your Star Wars. When in reality, Star Wars fans are going to be the things that kill Star Wars. This negativity, it can't keep going on. It's really depressing to see, and it's getting to the point where it's not just online but happening in person too. I've had conversations with people that I have met that think this way, or at Comic-Cons, and it's just so negative, and it's such a real downer. I think there are only really a few pillars left in the Star Wars community that uphold the true belief of positivity and what Star Wars should be, a shining light. I want you to close your eyes and cast your mind back to just after Episode 7 came out. It's Christmas time, and all anyone is watching or doing is playing Battlefront 2015 or watching endless amounts of theory videos as to who Snoke actually is. Not to mention all the other theory videos of who are Rey's parents, stuff like that. As a kid, I was so obsessed with Star Wars that my first ever YouTube video I watched whilst my mother was at a bar that she was working at, and the patrons were shouting and angry, and the only thing between me and those men was the bar I was sat behind on a New Year's Eve watching Is Jar Jar a Sith Lord? That is what Star Wars used to be, and what it should be. Just because a lot of people hate your own opinion doesn't mean that you should too. You should be able to like what you want without being chastised. People need to open their eyes and stop just blindly hating on everything because it doesn't get you anywhere. We as a people are on a scale right now, and that scale is about to tip in the wrong way in every conceivable manner. And if we don't start working together, the world that we know it will end. But, I mean, hey, people are just blindly loving one man and blindly hating another, even though they're either both as good or as bad as each other. So I don't know what to tell you. I mean, what was even the point of this video? I don't know. You tell me.